I'd like to tell you a story that I know. It's about an old preacher. And one day he was on his way to revival, and he seen a young man standing beside the road, and well, for some reason he just felt like stopping and picking this young man up. He got him into his automobile and he introduced himself to him, and he said, "Son, where are you going?" He said, "Preacher, I'm going home." "Oh, I haven't been home in a long time. I'm sort of anxious to see Mom and Dad, and I just hope they'd be glad to see me." And the old preacher, he looked over at the young man, and he thought that was strange, because any mom and dad would be glad to look down the road to see their son a-coming. He said, "Preacher, you don't know my background. You don't know the things that I've done in my life. When I was a young boy back home, going to high school, Mom, she had to take in washings and ironings, and my poor old gray-haired dad had to get an extra job just so that I could graduate. And after I graduated, preacher, I got ashamed of Mom and Dad. I was ashamed of how they talked and how they dressed. I was even ashamed for my friends to come in and meet them. Well, one night, preacher, I came in very late. And me and my dad, we got into an argument, and I hit my dad that night. And I told him then I'd never step foot into his house again. Mom, she cried, and she begged me not to leave. But I left anyway, and I went into the city, and I got myself a job. And every now and then I'd hear from home, and Mom, she'd beg me to come back, but it just seemed like one thing led to another. But it wasn't long, preacher, till I got into some trouble. I got into some bad trouble. They had to come and take and put me into jail. And well, it broke my poor old mama's heart, because everybody back home, they knew all about it. It's been 5 years now since I've been home. And the old preacher looked at him and he said, "Son, if it's been that long, how come you're going back home now?" He said, "Preacher, about a week ago, I was walking down the street, and I heard some music coming from a little church across the street, and they were singing, 'Lord, I'm coming home.' And I began to think of Mom and Dad. And I was so ashamed to go inside that I stayed out there in the dark. But oh, that night, when the preacher preached that message, it got a hold of my heart. He preached about a young boy that had left his father and went into the city and spent all that he had. And he finally had to get a job feeding the hogs. Oh, but one day, he remembered home. And his father had seen him a-coming afar off. He ran and he welcomed him with open arms. And well, that sort of reminded me of myself. So that night, when that preacher gave that altar call, right there in the dark, I knelt down and I cried, "Oh, Jesus, save my soul." I rode home and I told Mom that I'd like to come home. Preacher, we've got some apple trees on an orchard on the hillside, and I told Mom that if she'd let me come home for just even a day or two to just tie an old white rag in the treetop, and that when I'd come back or come by that I would know. It wasn't long till they came to that place where that young man lived. He said, "Preacher, would you look on that hillside for me?" He said, "Sure, son." The old preacher looked on the hillside and he said, "Son, not only is there one white rag tied to that tree, but," he said, "there's white rags, sheets, and pillowcases tied to every tree on that hillside. And standing beside the road is a precious old gray-haired mother and dad just a-waving a big white sheet." Oh, you talk about the power of God coming down. They begin to shout and to praise God right there in the automobile. The preacher said, "Now, don't you get out here, son. I'm going to take you on home. I want to meet that Mom and Dad. I want to be there when